It's not just about putting in any type of research application. You want to make sure that that application is focused on what we as a foundation are strategically focused on. And so as a board, when we come to look at the applications, we're really looking at, does it deliver on those strategic goals?
Welcome to the Dental Protection Podcast. My name is Terry Simpson, and this is the Research in Dentistry series. In today's podcast, we talk about the work of MPS Foundation and how to apply for funding for your project. With us today are our regular guest, Professor Jan Clarkson, and two of my colleagues at Dental Protection, Adrian Jackson and Dr. George Wright. Jan, perhaps you would start by just recapping on your title and current role.
Okay, thank you, Terry. Jan Clarkson, and Professor of Clinical Effectiveness at the University of Dundee, and have experience of several multi-centre trials within primary dental care. So I think that's the reason why I'm here, is my experience of research, particularly in a primary care setting.
Thanks very much, Jan. And over to you, Adrian. Perhaps you could give us some details about yourself.
Hi, I'm Adrian Jackson. I'm the head of the MPS Foundation, a role I've held since the start of the MPS Foundation in February 2021, and I was instrumental before that in setting the foundation up and establishing it.
Thanks, Adrian. And George?
Yeah, thank you, Terry. Thank you for the invitation to come along and chat this afternoon. So my name is George Wright. I've been with MPS for about 7 years now. My background's as a general dentist in general dental practice. And I join us today, I suppose, because of my role on the MPS Foundation board.
Okay, thank you very much, George. Perhaps, Adrian, coming to you first, can you explain the work of the foundation and why MPS considers this to be so important?
Yes, quite simply. The MPS Foundation is an initiative which was approved by the MPS Council in 2020 because we're a not-for-profit organisation. We're an organisation that values our members, and we actually see that research, and particularly the areas of research the MPS Foundation focuses upon, is really important. If you look at the purpose of the MPS Foundation, it is to undertake research, analyse, education and training to enable MPS members and healthcare professionals to improve the safety and outcomes of their patients, reduce their own risk and improve their own well-being. And this is important because the areas we're looking to support research into are areas which haven't had that traditional support. And we also support research across all 9 MPS jurisdictions. That includes areas which are traditional hotbeds of research like the UK, but also areas where you have a lot less research and which aren't shared globally. And one of the areas we want to do is share learning across our jurisdictions. Not everything invented in the UK is the best thing since sliced bread, but also things invented in the UK can be shared across the piece. And we've developed what I think is an efficient system and sort of supporting our research. You know, when we have a call for funding and grants, we start with an expression of interest rather than expecting research to go into huge detail around their project. So we actually build our projects from that perspective of let's look at the expressions of interest, let's look at how they associate with our priorities. And we're looking for translatable research that goes across jurisdictions and across countries, as I've mentioned earlier.
Thanks, Adrian. We do get a lot of grant applications, both from medicine and dentistry. I think it would be very helpful at this point to ask Jan, you see a lot of grant applications, and indeed you've been involved in applying for grants yourself to fund research. What do you think the key things to consider are when applying for a grant?
Okay, I suppose this is like a bit of a top tips. And so the first thing is you have to allow plenty of time. And what we all do is think we can do things more quickly than reality. And that absolutely applies with the grant application. Because from my experience, you may think that you've got it sorted initially, but inevitably, once you start talking with colleagues and collaborators, things change. So you need time. But essentially, you also need to know that the funder is interested and willing to fund the research that you're applying for. And so this is really clear in terms of the foundation, what the priorities are. And so if the application does not translate or link into patient safety, risk mitigation, or improving health and well-being, then you shouldn't be applying. But everybody should always have a conversation with the funder, because that is when you really understand that actually where you think you're going is in the direction of, in this case, the foundation. I think if you've not done any research before, it is so important that you collaborate and work with people who have. It isn't easy. And so I think for individuals, whether it is finding a mentor, but also is thinking about the expertise of a team that you need to bring around you. Actually, as well, that you enjoy working together. So you need to get the right team. And you need to decide who are the sort of like, who's going to be the chief investigator and the collaborators. Then it is about the application, and it is, even for an expression of interest, is making sure that it is really clear for anyone to understand what it is that you're writing. So it's almost considering the audience too of the people who are going to review the application, because they may not all be dentists, and they could be from across the world, and I understand with jurisdictions as well. So it's being aware of that. And I suppose when you're coming up with your idea, it is to think of what is the impact. Because MPS will want to fund something that has got the chance of making a difference. And so it is thinking of what the results of the work that you're planning to do might be. And so considering that impact and also providing the evidence of why it is needed. And I think it is to consider what the health, societal, or economic benefits will be. As someone who reviews an application, it is so important that it's evidenced, with preliminary data that you've actually generated yourself or actually others' research. So it's evidencing the need and it's telling the story coherently. And in terms of the methods, that is really key, because you've got to make sure that the methods are able to answer the question. And that is where, too, you often need experts in particular areas. It may be methodology, stats, psychology, behavioral sciences, economics. And I suppose this goes back to thinking about who your partners are and how you find that group. Just as important in an application is to understand what's feasible and whether or not actually it can be reached within the timeline that you say, and also to make sure that it's appropriately costed. So you do have sufficient funds. And I think once you've drafted what will be an expression of interest, it's to share it with people, get people's feedback before you actually submit. And it's the small things that make a difference. It's how you lay it out on the page, the white space versus the dark spaces. And I think it's really thinking of the people who are going to read it and for it to be clear, understandable, and actually easy for them to see what your vision is and the impact that this work can have. So I hope that wasn't too quick a skirt through. And
No, not at all, Jan. I think it's very helpful. One of the things that the foundation will inevitably need to focus on, and that's qualitative research, I suspect, in many of those areas, because it doesn't just neatly fit into a lot of quantitative research projects. So do you think there's any skill sets we particularly need to look towards, including in that kind of research?
Yes. I mean, I think it is sort of like identifying people who have experience and a track record in qualitative research. Increasingly, there are people across the university sector, but actually also within the NHS, who've got that qualitative research experience. People imagine that qualitative research is easier than quantitative, but actually done well, it is rigorous in itself. And the whole premise of analysis of qualitative research is very precise and thorough and actually hugely impactful. I mean, it's interesting thinking about the area of health and well-being of the profession. And I suppose what helps is knowing the size of the problem, but then it's actually dealing into an understanding of it. And I think from your perspective and the foundation, it's maybe identifying things that can be done to improve things.
Well, thanks, Jan, for that. I know that we've had a few problems with one or two of the applications we've had, and that just sometimes the skill mix just didn't feel quite right, and that we maybe had an overemphasis of the number of dental professionals and to do qualitative research, and maybe only a very small number of hours allocated to maybe a psychologist or somebody coming in. So it has felt sometimes in the past that the applications haven't felt quite right from that point of view. Okay, at this point, George, I'd like to ask you, what do the Foundation Committee look for when we're looking to approve a project for funding?
Yeah, thank you, Terry. I suppose really in answering that, you want to think about what it is that, going back to Adrian's comments before, what the foundation is seeking to achieve in its existence. You have to appreciate that MPS has put a significant amount of funding into the foundation, and that is all member money. Our members are ultimately funding this. And so for us, the focus wants to be on being able to deliver some benefits ultimately to our members. So that may be that the research helps to reduce risk for patients and then ultimately our members, that it might improve the well-being for our members and for the wider profession, that it can focus on those areas of work that we as an organization deal with on a day-to-day basis. So that kind of links into our key areas, priority areas for research. So things like human factors, looking at how we as communicators and individuals delivering patient care can be influenced by team working, by systems, processes, but also on things like I've mentioned, well-being, digital integration, effectiveness of teaching and learning outcomes. So it's not just about, as Professor Clarkson said there, it's not just about putting in any type of research application. You want to make sure that application is focused on what we as a foundation are strategically focused on. And so as a board, when we come to look at the applications, we're really looking at, does it deliver on those strategic goals?
Well, thank you very much, George. Adrian, have you anything you'd like to add at this stage about that?
I would both say George and Jan have really covered some of the key areas and some of the key learning that we've had from last year around that being, and I would pick up again on what Jan said around, it's answering the question. So often you have what looks like a good proposal that comes through, but you're expecting members of the research committee, members of the board to almost read between the lines. Just because you as a researcher think this is a great idea, don't assume that everybody else will be able to read what you've left out in a very simplistic way. And the other area which hasn't perhaps come through as much is to consider risk. We ask in our full application, what are the risks associated with the project? And quite often people were quite simplistic in their response to what they think the risks are. But actually, it's really informative if you've really thought about the risks associated with your project. It gives us confidence as funders that you've really thought through what your project is going to deliver and what the challenges are. Because what you write on paper is like all, best laid plans, etc. Once you get to the real world, that's when you suddenly find you can't get that group of participants that you assumed you were going to get, or this bit of approval is going to take a lot longer than you actually assumed. Going back to Jan's point around things taking longer than you think. When you get to doing your study, it will take longer, and you will have unforeseen, or hopefully foreseen, but you will have challenges which you need to overcome. So I would just want to emphasize, think about the risks associated with your project.
Thanks very much, Adrian. I know earlier, Adrian, you talked about the various jurisdictions that dental protection is involved with. I'm very conscious that these podcasts only have British participation, and that we do want to involve members from many parts of the globe and want to be as inclusive as possible. George, have you anything you'd like to add on this, being involved with the foundation so intimately?
Yeah, I think, coming at this from with the background in general dental practice, I would say, sometimes we as clinicians have some really great ideas. We see things in our practices and the way that we deliver care to patients. And I think maybe write ourselves off because we don't come from that research background. And whilst I totally agree with everything that's been said about needing, that diverse team of experience and skill set, actually don't write yourself off. If you've got a good idea, if you think you've identified something in general practice that can deliver a benefit to patients and ultimately therefore to our members, then have a think about putting a research project together. There's a number of things that we look at. I've talked about the kind of strategic aims of the foundation, but also, we want to make sure that there is a balance of jurisdiction. We want to make sure that we have representation from as many of the countries that MPS operates as possible.
Absolutely.
And particularly so where those cases may have benefits to the wider community. It may well be that somebody sitting in Australia has identified something that could be really wide ranging in its impact and have influence and impact on our members over here in the UK and further afield. So, don't write yourself off just because you think, actually, I don't quite have that depth of experience in the field of research.
Well, thanks very much, George. That's very helpful. Perhaps at this stage, I'm interested to hear if, Jan, you've any sort of comments, having listened to what everybody else has said, on how you feel the foundation might prosper in the future, hopefully.
So I suppose just going to George's point there of not writing yourself off. Absolutely. Some of the best research ideas are generated by the people who are living and breathing dentistry. But it is to work with people who can translate those ideas into doable research. And I suppose it's how you find those connections and networks. Certainly within the UK, there's increasing cohesion around oral and dental specialty research. And there are groups that are funded by the NHS National Research Funding System. So it is a network of connectivity. So I think as well, it is don't write yourself off, but don't do it on your own. It is how to get that network in. In terms of jurisdictions, absolutely. And I mean, what happens at the moment in research in about oral and dental research is estimated that about 96% of it is a waste because it's either not answering an important question, or it's not done well, or it's not published. And so the questions that impact around the world, particularly, I mean, I just sort of like just thinking coming out of COVID, and we're still, the profession is still experiencing the consequences of that. But that's the same in the UK as it is in many parts of the world. And I suppose one thing, and sort of like Adrian, that whole issue of risk, absolutely. And it is considering what is going to go wrong. And absolutely things do go wrong. and or take much longer than you think. So having considered that, but one thing that we haven't mentioned, Terry, is patience. So it's actually public and patient involvement, because that is such a key part, especially around the issues of patient safety and risk mitigation. But it is consider hearing the voice and involving the patient and public, and certainly also maybe different oral health professionals too in the conversations around what is important.
Thanks very much, Jan. That's great. Perhaps at this stage, to sort of close proceedings, I could turn to Adrian to say a few words about publications and intellectual property in particular.
Yeah, no problem at all. We encourage people we support with research. We want them to publish. We want them to broadcast their findings. We will encourage them as well. So we will be running things like podcasts which share that people's research publications. We will actually, support that publication. But we want to learn from what doesn't go well as just success. So often in research, you only ever hear around this was a great piece of research and this was a great finding. We want to support those areas where actually we thought this was an important question, or we thought there was a really good piece of research here that was going to be done, and what we found was not what we set out to achieve or what we thought was going to happen. Sharing that is important because it means that somebody else doesn't repeat that error, that issue, but also learns from that. And then the next piece of research is developed from that. So whether it's success or failure, we want to actually share those findings with everybody. And just on the point of intellectual property, we want to own this. We want to get we're looking at translatable research, we're looking at applied research, things that can be pushed out into that workspace, and that's what we want to share with MPS members going forward.
Thanks very much, Adrian. Thanks indeed to everybody today. I'm very grateful to Adrian, Jan and George for their contributions. If you'd like a certificate for listening to go towards your CPD or learn more about what we've covered today and who you are listening to, please do take a look in the podcast description. I've been your host, Terry Simpson, and in your next podcast, you'll hear once more from Noel Kavanagh. Thank you for listening.